Eärnil I, his nephew who succeeded him, repaired the ancient haven of Pelargir and built a great navy. He laid siege by sea and land to Umbar and took it, and it became a great harbor and fortress of the power of Gondor. Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we are taking a look at one of the most famous port havens in all of Middle-earth, Umbar, the home of the Corsairs. For my sources of today's video, check out the links in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. Within the lore of Tolkien's works, we know Umbar, the meaning of which is forgotten in the pre-Numenorean language, as the southernmost named city in Middle-earth, in a canonical sense. While there were certainly other places and lands south and east of Umbar, Umbar really is that last named city in Middle-earth that is that far south. It was established sometime in the Second Age by Numenoreans, likely around 1800, yet it is possible that the area was discovered far earlier by some far-reaching mariner of Numenor who sailed the seas, such as Tar Aldarion. Now, a difference between Umbar and other Numenorean ports was that it lacked a sort of great river next to or connected to its bay. Rather, this port consisted of a wide encirclement of shoreline, making it an apt place for many ships. Umbar stood apart from the ports of the Numenoreans to the north in many ways, making it a foil to the port of Pelargir and Gondor, for instance. While Numenoreans reached far and across the world in their golden years, Umbar and likely other ports further south and perhaps east were more in the hands of the king's men rather than the faithful, and these would become eventually Black Numenoreans. This was due to the proximity of the northern ports to the elves. While the faithful Numenoreans, later Arnorians and Gondorians, remembered their ancient friendship with those elves and would take those ports in the north, those in the south let their hatred and jealousy of the immortal Eldar fester and grow, until they would eventually despise them as enemies. But for a time at least, these men in Umbar simply steered clear of the elves in the Second Age, while still opposing Sauron for the most part, but taking action against him in their own ways. In the years after the establishment of their dominions, many Numenoreans began levying tribute and oppression upon the men of Middle-earth who lived near their colonies, and it is very likely that Umbar was one of the worst offenders in this regard, as the men who lived there would make Umbar into a great fortress in 2280 of the Second Age. It would hold against any and all of Sauron's servants in the age, and would serve as a landing place for King Ar-Pharazôn's mighty host in 3261, when they went forth to capture Sauron. Eventually, a white tower would be built to memorialize this event and Ar-Pharazôn's victory upon a hill near Umbar. And so it was that after the downfall of Numenor, Pelargir and other northern refuges would be claimed by the faithful followers of Elendil and his sons, they who were thus sundered in alliance with the followers of Ar-Pharazôn who had survived, who maintained their grasp on Umbar in the south. These men would not choose to stay dormant either, as in the early Third Age, the Black Numenorean descendants in Umbar would fight against King Eärnil I, who took Umbar as a fortress of Gondor in 933. What incited this conflict, or what exactly brought it to this conclusion, is rather unknown. Harad would eventually also be conquered by another king of Gondor, and while there were certainly some remnants of Black Numenoreans who despised Gondor, they would lose power in these lands for a time, as Gondor expanded out into Middle-earth, not too dissimilarly to Numenoreans' old golden years. The legacies of hatred such as these are not easily laid to rest, and after the kinstrife, Gondor's civil war, those who lost, those who had opposed the true heir of Anarion in Eldacar, and had supported another named Castamir, fled and retook Umbar for those who hated and rebelled against Gondor in 1448. These men, the rebels against Gondor, would join with they who hated Gondor most in the south, and they would become a new faction, the Corsairs of Umbar. These men would all make war upon Gondor, slaying one of their kings, King Aldemir, in 1540. They would raid Pelargir nearly 100 years later in 1634, led by Angamaiti and Sengahayando, heirs of Castamir who saw to the death of King Menardil, before eventually Umbar was crushed by King Telumethar Umbardakil in 1810, as history continued to repeat itself with the Gondorian king crushing and taking Umbar. As we can see by this continued and somewhat repetitive history between Umbar and Gondor, any outside occupation of Umbar could not last, and the Corsairs would again wrest control and continue, at times to harass the shorelines of Gondor, even potentially coordinating with and helping other enemies of Gondor and Rohan such as the Dunlendings and Easterlings. For more detail on this, please see my history of Gondor. Eventually, after Sauron returned to Mordor in the late Third Age, making preparations for a new, final war, the White Tower of Ar-Pharazôn's victory, that monument near Umbar, would be cast down, and the Corsairs would make new threats on the ever-weakening Gondor. This would be stopped for a time, however, by a man named Thorongil, who served Steward Ecthelion II, as he took a small fleet, attacking Umbar and their ships at night, and burning them, while battling and taking victory over the captain of the Haven, before retreating back to, and then leaving Gondor. Yet, the defeated Umbarians would rebuild again, and during the War of the Ring in 3018 through 3019, they would once more harass the coasts of Gondor and Belfalas, while Gondor's power was also being tested by the orcs of Mordor, Haradrim, Easterlings, Nazgul, and others. The Corsairs of Umbar made a great fleet, one that would have smashed Minas Tirith in the end, and seen the White Tree burn. They attacked Pelargir and would have sailed the River Anduin, if Thorongil had not returned unlooked for, with an army of ghost men called Oathbreakers at his call. The fear of this destroyed the plans of the Corsairs as they died and fled, even into the sea, and their slaves among the men of Gondor were set free. Thorongil would use these ships for his own purpose, sailing up the Anduin and letting fly the standard of the King of Arnor and Gondor. Thorongil would then eventually become king in Gondor after the war, named King Elisar, and it is likely that he was Umbar's worst fear since Umbardikill. Eventually, in the Fourth Age, it is also likely that Umbar was once again subdued by the West, yet we can hope that the new king of Gondor learned from the past, acknowledging the fact that Umbar would never quite be controlled from outside forces, including Gondor, and that some other arrangement would have to be made lest the West would fall back into a back-and-forth war with Umbar once again. From Umbar's point of view, it is likely that they saw Gondor as conquerors and invaders in their own way, even if the men of Umbar themselves had, of course, committed atrocities beyond count. It really speaks to the realism among the kingdoms of men in Tolkien's works, this back-and-forth, perhaps repetitive war between Gondor and Umbar, and how difficult it can be to solve such an issue. With all of that said, we come to the end of our tale on Umbar, the city of Corsairs. From this tale, we see the complexity of war in the hearts of men. Just as Gondor never truly found a long-lasting peace with Umbar, and never addressed what was really problematic between the two realms, we must remember that we should work to fix the problems in our world, not just temporarily, but in perpetuity. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this region spotlight. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on Umbar? Let me know in the comments below. I really enjoy what we know about Umbar, and some of the deeper lore from the more obscure text that is present here as well. I'm very excited to see what the Lord of the Rings Online does with Umbar in their upcoming expansion, so shout out to them. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles, or order some Weta or United Cutlery Lord of the Rings swords, statues, and other replicas from Castle Kon, who does international shipping, and use the code WEST at checkout. Please check out our merch and Patreon as well. Thank you to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members: Peter Sheppard, Blair Scouten, Merten, John Hume, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibs, Rhys Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Dale Davis, Kingswald Project, Robert Bogue, Theodore, and Moon Viper. Thank you so much to all of our patrons and YouTube members. It really means a lot. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a video on why didn't the elves play a larger role in The Lord of the Rings. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.